Okay, so we're kind of going through a weird period in movies where even billion-dollar franchises are bombing at the box office. I actually have a theory about why this is happening, which I'm gonna call the War for the Rohirrim theory. We'll explain more in a bit, but though that's connected to a specific franchise, I think it can be applied to Hollywood in general, as it's something that more times than not it is proven to be true. I've also been asked a lot about my thoughts on the news with James Bond, and I'm going to talk about that later and how it kind of ties into this overall analysis, which is why I'm wearing the suit. Also, I just like wearing suits about the house, like the bad guy from Reacher. Anyway, the War for the Rohirrim theory was something I thought about when watching The War for the Rohirrim. The theory is that the further you get away from the premise of an IP, the less the audience will be interested in it. For example, The One Ring was the central thing of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, with the Fellowship trying to destroy it. The Hobbit was then released as a prequel film, which centered around its discovery and usage. That was one step removed, and though it featured some of the same characters, it still kept that core thing at the center. However, because it's one step away from the ring being the central focus, interest wasn't as hot. You then have the Rings of Power, which is even further removed, and so on and so forth. That then takes us to the War of the Rohirrim, which was set in the same world, but it doesn't really feature anything that was what interested people in the first place. Because of that, no one really cared, and the audience completely switched off to it. So again, the theory is that the further you get away from the original premise, the more you see diminishing returns, and the more the audience switches off. Hollywood's going through a weird phase at the moment where they've kind of run through all their original IPs. In the past, you'd get remakes and sequels, but normally these would be tempered. For example, back in the 90s, it would be rare to see a franchise get beyond 4 movies, but now, franchises go on forever and ever and ever. I know there was lots of Friday the 13th movies, but it was a rarity. Streaming services, though, they've meant Hollywood's got a brand new avenue, and they can pump out spin-off after spin-off after spin-off after spin-off, and it gets nauseating. Eventually, you just kind of hit a point where there's so many spin-offs, characters getting shows and movies, that there's actually an overabundance of content. This makes a franchise hit a point where it kind of buckles under its own weight and the whole thing just caves in. I think you can apply that to things like Star Wars, Marvel, and whatever you want at this point really. It's reflected in the box office and viewership, and yeah, I think it can cause a lot of problems for franchises. Call it franchise fatigue, spin-off fatigue, the War of the Rohirrim theory, which we're trying to make that a thing. Call it what you want, but I think we're starting to see that across lots of different franchises. Star Wars is pretty much dead at this point, and Skeleton Crew didn't even appear on the Nielsen top 10 once in its entire run. And this is a Star Wars show. You can definitely tell that Disney are a bit worried, and that's why I think they're releasing Andor 3 episodes at a time. Used to be the biggest franchise in the world, now they're like, we're kind of worried, make it a binge, just shove it all out. Marvel are also kind of at a tipping point, I think. We've gone from a universe where that universe was successful every single project to now having one where the odd project's successful, but most of them just either break even or underperform quite a bit. Now, the strategy of spin-offs and milking things dry can work if you're releasing projects that are bangers. For example, we have the Batman and the Penguin. Even though IGN gave the latter a 5 out of 10, which I'll never forgive, I think most people agreed it was a banger, and probably the best show of last year, if not in at least the top 5. However, the more spin-offs in projects you make alongside the main thing, the more people you have to get involved in the spin-offs. Thus, the original creators and visionaries are stretched thin. It becomes difficult to manage, and eventually that quality dips because the quantity's too high. People then hit a point where they're sick of watching mediocre releases, and they see a property as being that rather than one that's a sign of quality. Like, think back to 10 years ago. The Marvel Studios logo, that was a seal of quality before a project. Now it's just like, oh, another one. Is it gonna be good? I don't know. Probably never watch this again either way. This just turns the audience against the franchise and ultimately kills it. Now, we went through a phase of having the shared universe where every single movie studio was trying to make a shared universe. Many tried, many died, and several shared universes are in the shared universe graveyard. Now it seems like every studio is trying to make a streaming spin-off universe, and it's just a bit weird to me. As of making this video for our members, they've just announced that DC are going to be doing 7 projects every single year. This is going to be a mix of several live action movies, TV shows, animated movies, and animated TV shows. And honestly, it feels like too much. I'm someone who always thinks you should be cautious over taking big risks, and the fact they're committing to 7 projects a year, I don't know. They've also said the authority's on the back burner, and now it's kind of like, you didn't need to announce any of these in the first place, and I feel like a lot of the time, these things are just shallow announcements without any real plan or something in place to do it. Looking at you, Star Wars, as well, and all the stuff you've announced. Like, think about it though, yeah? Like, you're already cancelling projects you've announced and then announcing more projects before you've even released the first one. Stop. Please. Like, Star Wars have just hit a point now where even when they announce a project, you pretty much know it's never going to get made because it happens so often. I have plans. I have a sort of plan of a plan sort of thing. So that kind of takes me into my thoughts on the James Bond franchise and what I think is the smartest move to take with it. When it was announced, the Bond fandom were acting like the sky was falling. The sky falls, you could say. No prime to die. Anyway, when it was announced, I legitimately felt like a friend had been killed. Like, it was that bad. Now, that's not even necessarily because I think Amazon are gonna mess it up, but it just feels like this has gone from being owned by a family to now a corporation, and that rarely works out well. Like Star Wars and, well, Lucasfilm in general, that was a completely independent studio. It just so happened to have big blockbuster budgets. That was the same with Bond and Eon, with the Broccoli's running it. They weren't really beholden to shareholders, you know, there wasn't sales targets that they had to hit and a profit margin that they had to constantly make, and they were just doing it because they owned the rights and had passion for the character. Now, as they say in The Dark Knight Rises, change can be either good or bad, and when a corporation gets a hold of something, it's probably going to be milk dry. I know Barbara Broccoli was pretty much telling us that Amazon was wanting to do spin-offs, but I really hope they don't. I hope we're hitting a point now where Hollywood just realize it's completely fine for side characters to stay side characters. I don't need a show about Q or Moneypenny. I actually think that it's really cool that you used to just have James Bond getting ready to go on the mission. He'd pop in and see M, flirt with Moneypenny, and then head off to Q Labs to go and get some gadgets. That's all you needed the characters for, and it was charming seeing them pop up in every single entry in this manner every single movie. It's completely fine to leave side characters as side characters. Side characters are important to a story as they help to prop up the protagonist, but they're often left to the side as they aren't interesting enough as individuals. This also means the main character isn't overshadowed, and the side characters provide things for them which help improve the story. And they've worked brilliantly in that way throughout theatre, books, films, comics, TV shows, and every single story since the beginning of time. I don't need the Minotaur's backstory from the ancient Greek myth explained to me. Ancient Greeks figure this out. You don't need to tell everyone about everything. So I do think that Hollywood will soon realize this when they lose all the money, and hopefully just start pulling back on just greenlighting every single project because the character featured in something successful. Now, in terms of Bond, I think Amazon have already seen exactly how to handle this franchise because it's been successful on film for over 60 years now. The entire blueprint on how to do a James Bond movie is right there, and it's worked for decades and decades. I don't think that they'll do that, and I do think they'll do spin-offs eventually, but I hope they at least make 2 big successful Bond movies before they even think about going that route. I was thinking about this the other day, and it is kind of wild to me how buying the James Bond franchise isn't really like buying any other franchise. For example, you know, let's look at Star Wars, or hell, even Paramount selling Marvel to Disney. You guys might not remember it, yeah, but if you start up those old Phase 1 movies on your Blu-rays, then you're gonna get the Paramount logo. Anyway, where the Bond franchise differs is that with those movies, you are buying the characters, continuity, and the actors. So you buy Star Wars, and you get Luke Skywalker, played by Mark Hamill, who, yeah, just popped up in those other films. Han Solo, you know, it was very much that continuity and going out from there. Where Bond differs though is that we've just seen James Bond die. Craig has had a full circle arc that ended with the character being no more. So anything that Amazon do now has to be a fresh take. They can't really get Craig in or even say Bond is a carryover like they did with, say, Princess Leia or something with Star Wars. So everything has to be new. Now luckily, it's James Bond, so there's this built-in expectation from the audience that different actors play the part, and it's fine to have new versions of Q and so on and so forth. Hell, it's even fine to bring back other actors in the same part with the audience understanding these are slightly different versions. See Judi Dench's M. Anyway, when it comes to handling James Bond, I think, and I know I'm gonna get some crap for this, but I think that Amazon should play it very safe for their first couple of outings. Now, I'm gonna get called a basic bitch, but because of this, I think Henry Cavill's the go-to. I actually thought that he was perfect for years, and I told people for years and years, like, cast Henry Cavill. Then I saw his Casino Royale audition, and yeah, I read that Matt was actually talking about this, and he said it was like, there was a Snyder Cut account, you guys might remember, and they campaigned for years and years to get it released. And then when it came out, They just disappeared, and DMs then leaked saying they didn't really like it. That's some deep fandom lore there, but yeah, that's kind of how I felt with Henry Cavill. However, I think since then he's grown as an actor, and just watch Man from U.N.C.L.E. to see how much he nails it. Now, I think when making their first phase, Amazon needs to show they actually know what makes a James Bond movie a James Bond movie. As much as I thought The Force Awakens was just a reskin of A New Hope, I think that was the smartest thing that Disney could have done. They showed the world they actually knew how to make a Star Wars movie, and thus the film did well. It was mainly the sequels that veered stuff off, but yeah, love or hate that first film, it was still successful when it came to the box office and filling fans with confidence. So I think Amazon needs to just play things as safe as possible, not take risks, and make a very, very good movie before even trying to do the spin-offs and so on. Now, as the saying goes, making a hit is easy. It's only when you make the second hit that you show the world you can do it again, and it wasn't just luck. Is that a saying? It is now. Anyway, they need to make sure that James Bond 1 and 2 are next level. Divert all your resources to that, put all your focus on those two, and don't even consider any spin-offs until they're ready. Martin Campbell has also said he'd be interested in doing Bond 26 as well. If you're not up on your Bond directors, he's the guy who did GoldenEye and then came back and did Casino Royale. So he's not only rebooted Bond twice with new actors, but he's also arguably made those actors' best films. I think at the very least, you need to get him in consulting, and yeah, he seems up for directing, so I would get him involved in any way possible. So yeah, overall, I think when you're building a franchise that you should just keep the focus on the main thing and accept that not everything needs a spin-off. It's fine to keep side characters as side characters and keep the focus on the main character because they're the main character for a reason. Just in general, I think Hollywood are really shooting themselves in the foot by doing way too much. Like, there's a weird business flaw with Disney and Disney Plus in general. On one hand, you're telling people to go to the cinema and see the movies, and on the other hand, you're propping up a reason to wait and stay at home because you're already paying for it. Netflix isn't doing that, you know, they're all in on streaming. They try the odd theatrical release, but they're not doing both. Sony, to me, you know, they made the right choice by just licensing their content, and I think the regret of going to streaming so much, it is starting to set in for some studios. A lot of projects are being cancelled, and it's clear they're dragging down the audience retention. Now, it's all because these streaming services needed content, and thus the studio looked at what they had and made shows on it. I'm just hoping that now, though, they've learned their lesson, and that Amazon will realize this when it comes to Bond. They could quite easily burn the character out in the next 10 years through doing this, or potentially create another 6-decade long-lasting legacy by taking care of the character. Don't view it as content, and actually understand why Bond's lasted as long as he had. As they say in Lord of the Rings, it's like butter scraped over too much bread. Something along those lines, but that all ties us back into that Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim theory. So that's my thoughts and theories on why things are the way they are, and why it might be difficult for these studios who have already milked these things so much to pull out of their tailspin. Like Kathleen Kennedy's leaving Star Wars now. I don't know what that means for the future, but yeah, it's going to be difficult to get fans back on board. Just take a break, take a 10-year break. Star Wars has done it in the past and it's worked brilliantly, so do that. Obviously though, this is just my thoughts and theories, and I'd love to hear yours. Please drop a comment, and while you're down there, smash the thumbs up. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this went out early for members, and did you know that members of the channel, they get early access to videos? If you click the join button, you get at least one breakdown a week before anyone else. Costs just 99 cents a month, and we've tried to set it where hopefully it's not a lot to you, but if a lot of you do it, then it will mean a lot to us. We appreciate everyone on board with that. You know, it makes a massive difference to the channel, and huge thank you for everyone who supports us. Now, if you want something else to watch, you've got a video on screen right now going over my thoughts and theories about why Marvel should be worried. It's more of a detailed look at the studio's strategy, and if you enjoyed this video, you'll probably enjoy that, or enjoy disagreeing with it. Anyway, with that out of the way, huge thank you for watching this one. I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.